Hi, this is John, your host of Dairyland Frights, the paranormal podcast that covers everything spooky, creepy, and mysterious in the Midwest and beyond. And boy, the holidays keep giving because I have another great guest. I've no pressure, Holly, which I'll introduce in a second here, but I've had nothing but great guests. So we're going to have that right tonight, obviously, with Holly here. And tonight on the podcast, I have Holly Faust, and she works with Phantom Detectives LLC. But not only is she a paranormal investigator, but she's a writer, researcher, esoteric minister, Reiki master / teacher, psychic medium, and child advocate. That's a lot, Holly. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being on the show. So I kind of went through a little bit here about you, but obviously, why don't you let my spooky friends let a little bit more about you and everything? Because I went through kind of a lot of stuff there. You're very busy, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you decide to become a stay-at-home mom. But I've been investigating the paranormal for a little over 30 years now. I was 19 when I got started, and I'm going to be 50 on Sunday, the 15th of December.
Happy birthday!
Yeah. I've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
And, it was the thing that got me started was losing a friend to suicide and being told that they couldn't go to heaven. Because one, they were homosexual, and two, they killed themselves, so that wasn't allowed. So I went on a quest, and that's what started this whole journey for me. I mean, I had experiences as a child. I seen things, I heard things, I experienced a lot. But coming from a very devout Catholic family, we were told we don't talk about that stuff. Like my mom even went as far as trying to have me exercise.
Ooh.
Yeah. So,
okay.
So I kind of, kept all of that deep inside for a very long time. And it wasn't until 2001, when September 11th happened, I had a lot of personal ties to people who we lost that day. And I had a psychic breakthrough, they call it. I actually thought I was going crazy. I admitted myself to a psych ward because I was hearing voices and I didn't understand what was going on. So that even started me further down the rabbit hole of the paranormal. And then I had 2 children diagnosed with autism, and they started experiencing things. And that's what really pushed me even further into connecting. I actually reached out to Lorraine Warren and a few other people who aided me in the journey with my son.
Right.
And and that just, from there, it just snowballed. I just kept getting more and more and more involved in the paranormal. And that's when I actually got involved with Reiki, because I was told that it could be beneficial to kids with autism. So I went through the whole gamut all the way through to master teacher. And I very rarely take clients. My kids were my clients. So it was just for them that I went through all that education. I mean, I will take clients if people ask me, but for the most part, it's not something I'm out there advertising because I did it for my kids.
Yeah. And that's always interesting how paranormal experiences started, right? I think everyone's in a different. I've interviewed a lot of mediums and a lot of paranormal investigators, and they range from I was a little girl and I saw a ghost walk through the wall, and I was like, okay, to I was the weird kid in the library getting all the paranormal books and sitting in the corner and reading them.
I was all the above.
Right?
I grew up in a house that was built in the 1800s, and it was actually a meeting hall at one time for the KKK.
Oh boy.
So there were all of these secret passageways, and there was a woman who committed suicide by jumping out of the attic window. So there was a ton of activity that was always happening. And I used to actually hear things through my radio, which, people would laugh when I tell them about it. But I remember specifically the day my grandmother died. My best friend was there, and we were playing Barbies. And, all of a sudden I heard, through the radio that my grandmother died. And so I started packing up all her stuff, and she's looking at me like, what's going on? And I'm like, you have to go home. My grandmother died. And it was about 10 minutes later, my mother came up the steps to tell my friend she had to go home because my grandmother passed away.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, go on. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that was, and it was weird how that would happen. Like, the power, like the radio would flicker off and on in my room. And then I would like get these messages through it. I don't know if I was hearing it in my head, but assumed it was coming from the radio. But I always said I got my messages through the radio.
Yeah. So was that your first, Holly, was that your first paranormal experience that you can remember, or did you have an earlier one?
I had them earlier.
Okay.
As far back as I can remember, I kind of knew things before they happened. And we think it ran in the family because my grandmother used to tell everybody that Jesus talked to her. And she had this particular picture of Jesus that she would sit in front of, and she said he would talk to her and tell her things. And they all said she was crazy, but, and she was a devout, like she was from Ireland, and she was a devout Irish Catholic. She would sit and pray the rosary 24 hours a day. But she swore up and down. And, I remember when I was little, that picture was given to us, and it was like right between my bathroom and my bedroom. And I used to run to get away from it because I didn't want Jesus talking to me.
Right.
I was so afraid the picture was going to start talking to me. But like I said, I would hear things through the radio all the time.
That's interesting.
And it was from, I remember being a little girl and being in my parents' bedroom, and I could literally see people coming down from the attic. And this is where the meeting hall was up in the attic. And I could see people coming down, marching down from out of the attic.
This is something that I've wrestled with many times, talking to many mediums, paranormal investigators. How do you deal with that? I mean, that's tough. I mean, you just, right? I mean, you can't talk to, let me back up here. Like certain mediums kind of just finally got sick of it, of just hiding it, right? And just came out and said, Mom, Dad, I can hear voices. I do this, blah, 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 blah. I'm tired of it. Told their friends. Did you feel, because you talked about your grandma and Jesus talking to herself, did you ever do something like that? Did you ever just say, all right, this is what I can do? Or you just kind of just went through the motions and just kind of dealt with it as it came?
I went through the motions for a long time, and I actually stifled it for a very long time. And then it wasn't until after I was married and, experienced everything that I experienced on 9/11 is when I finally, when I understood what was happening.
Sure.
I just told everybody, I said, listen, I hear dead people and they communicate with me constantly. And, I think by that point, I had a little bit more understanding from my family, which was very helpful. My husband, I was married at the time. I had 2 small children, actually 3 small children. And so it was, accepted it finally, and because I always tell my mom, but, I was doing this when I was a kid. You wanted to have me exercise. So,
wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, but then, she's fine with it. She always asks me, like, if I ever hear my dad or my brother or anybody, that's passed in the family. And I said, well, I try to avoid that.
Yeah.
Simply because it's easier to not have to deal with my family.
Right. Okay, I hear you, Holly. And what is interesting is that every medium I've spoken to says everyone has the gift. They just, like you said, stifle it. Right? They just they don't want to bring it forward because people are gonna call me weird or crazy or exercise me or want to put me in an institution or give me more drugs or something. And I don't think that anyone should ever do that to anyone. I think you should let it come out, but I understand why people do it because you're scared, right? It's not a normal thing to say, hey, there's grandpa. He comes downstairs and I talk to him and he's doing fine, right? And people have a hard time dealing with that. So let me ask you this, though. How do you prepare when I'm not saying you're doing a session, but let's say you want to talk to someone in the spirit world. We'll just use that for right now. How do you ensure a clear connection with the spirit world, Holly? So you're not getting any mixed message of what this person wants or what they're trying to communicate.
For me, it can be difficult at times because of the way that I get a connection. I have times when things come to me, like I remember I will literally post on Facebook, like, there's this dude, John, that just showed up, and, he has brown hair and he keeps whistling this particular song. Who does he belong to? Because a lot of times I don't know, they like, but then there's other times where I'm sitting down with someone. And a lot of times I ask them to bring something that I like to do psychometry, holding on to it so that I can get that connection with when holding something that belonged to them at one time. Other times, like I do a lot in paranormal investigating, I never know who I'm going to connect with at each location. I've experienced physical pain with entities trying to come through. So I never know. And that's why I always tell people, don't ask me how I do it, because I still haven't figured it out. It's a lot of trial and error. Sometimes it works and other times it doesn't. If something on the other side doesn't want to come through, they're just going to put up a wall and say, sorry, no, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you talked about sometimes, being hurt and everything like that. Have you ever been on an investigation or just in a reading and something came through that you're like, oh, this is not what I expected or what I want?
Not so much in a reading. I've never had that happen in a reading, but investigating. We used to investigate a mansion out in Uniontown, in PA. It's right outside Pittsburgh. And we actually had a recording that was made there that we actually did send off to Lorraine Warren, because something was speaking through me and it sounded like Gollum from The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, wow.
I had no idea I had no memory of this happening, but you can literally hear my friend praying over me, yelling, wow, I've got you, trying to drag me out of the basement. And this voice answering back to her saying, I've got her. Oh, wow. And it was the freaky, and people that were in the house that were like upstairs. And there was no way that they could know what was going on in the basement, literally said, something's wrong with Holly, and came downstairs as, my friend was pulling me out of the basement. Wow. And I had multiple negative experiences like that in that house, where I would be sitting on the floor and they would watch my eyeballs roll into the back of my head. One of the women, her husband owned the building, had actually almost gotten to the point of suicide because of things in that house. Sure. And so that to me was like not being able to remember it, but listening back to it, it was a very scary experience, because that was really the first time anything ever spoke through me.
Oh, wow. So I'm going to divide this up. I'm going to divide this between investigation. So we'll talk about that, Holly, but I'm going to do some personal, because some of the services that you have that you can offer customers, clients. Let's start with that, because I always find this very interesting. Like, what is your approach to providing closure and comfort to clients during a reading? So someone's coming to you, obviously, and they're saying, I just want to tell Grandpa I love them.
Well, what do you do? I do a mediumship type of reading, but I also use trigger cards, and they're like messages that are coming through. And a lot of them, it's similar to tarot or oracle, but these are particularly mediumship cards of messages. And, I try to connect with that person, whoever it is that's there, and then also share the messages that are coming to me along with the trigger cards. It bothers me because most of my clients end up leaving crying. And to me, I'm being very empathic. I feel that deeply because of knowing what it's like to want that connection with someone that you cared about so deeply. I got to experience it with my best friend, that connection, and I know he's still with me, and I can feel him all around me. But so for me, when I go through that with a client, it's a breath of fresh air, but at the same time, it's hard. I just had a family. I do a holistic market every month throughout the spring into the winter. And I had a woman come to me to have a mediumship session. And then she came back later that day with her daughter and her husband. Didn't tell me why. and
Okay.
had me do readings for them.
All right.
And then after they all got done, she literally said, our teenage son died last year from cancer and you connected with him. And she was like, thank you so much because you were able to share what he wanted to tell us and that he never
That's
had a
nice.
chance to tell us. And I
Yeah.
to me, that was an honor. And I felt, like I was so grateful because I don't
Uh-huh.
really get a lot of feedback. People come, they give you the money, and then they're off on their way.
Yeah.
But when
Sure.
you get someone that not only leaves and drives 40 minutes away to go get their spouse and daughter,
Yeah.
and then shares with you, that was my teenage son, and you were right on. And to me, that meant so much.
I love that, Holly, that you could do something like that. Now, staying with this, when a person says to you, "Hey, Holly, how do I know that this is a past loved one? How do I see the signs? How do I recognize that they're around me and they're still there?" Is there anything that you can kind of comfort them with looking for, like look for this, or what did they do that
Yeah.
kind of help people see that?
I always tell them to fragrances.
Mm.
There was a particular soap that they don't make anymore. It was called Cashmere Sachet that my grandmother used. And whenever she's around, I can smell it. My dad, he shows up as butterflies. And, and I've seen my brother. And to me, like when I'm thinking about him, I tend to see a cardinal. Pennies.
I love that. Yeah.
I'll find pennies. And I always say they're pennies from heaven. Because I'll find them in the weirdest place. I'm having a bad day and I step outside my car and there's a penny on the ground.
Sure.
So, I always tell them little things, like think of the things that they loved or they liked in life. And they'll usually send you a symbol, of something like that to let you know, but you have to pay attention because sometimes it could be as simple as smelling a perfume or a flower, and other times a whiskey. My grandfather drank Irish whiskey and I can smell, and it's particularly Jameson that I can smell when he's around.
I love it. Yeah, and see, to me, maybe it's me, but I think for everyone that you can see a sign that, like you said, oh, there's a penny, or there's a smell, there's a fragrance, or I see there's a bird, or you just walk past maybe even a tree, and maybe your dad or your mom love trees, and maybe there's like a wind that just comes out of nowhere, right?
Yep. And if it reminds you of that person, it's most likely that person.
I love that. So let's flip here to investigations. Wow. That's all I have to say, Holly. Like, wow. You've been to a lot.
Yeah.
Let's start with your favorite place to investigate.
My goodness. Now I have to go through. Well, my favorite place of all time, and it's like a huge joke. It has been, like, even with the team I used to be with, my Disneyland is Gettysburg. When we used to do a lot of public investigations with my former team, and every time we would start making plans about where we wanted to go, I'd always say, let's go to Gettysburg. And they're like, we've been there 3 times. And I'm like, so what?
Give it a rest.
Yeah, so what? And I could literally probably spend a month there and still want to stay longer. It is absolutely one of my favorite places in the entire world. Besides that, I don't normally like prisons, but for some reason, the West Virginia Penitentiary keeps pulling me back there.
Okay.
I have a lot of, dreams about West Virginia Penn. And then the other place is Malvern Manor out in Iowa. And I've been there once, and I actually had dreams about that place before I even knew what it was. I kept seeing it in my dreams, and it kept calling me and calling a friend of mine. And then I finally got to go there on an investigation, and I just fell in love with the place for all the different information I was getting there.
Yeah. So let's back up to Gettysburg.
Yes.
Okay. Because I know that's kind of a bucket list for a lot of paranormal investigators to go to.
And it should be.
Right. So let's go back to your first experience there, if you can remember it. When you were driving up there, was there like immediate feeling, like voices or chills, or how did you feel the first time you went in there and you were like, man, This is going to be a day.
And this is the interesting thing. The first time I went there was after the death of my dad. It was me and my mom and my son, my nephew, and one of my nephew's friends. And we went for a weekend. And actually, I had very little experience the first time I was there. It was my son.
Yeah.
Who we were standing at Little Round Top looking down into Devil's Den. And at the time, they were doing a lot of work on the battlefield. So they had ropes up that said, please don't go past this. We're trying to, bring back the land the way it should be. And and then my son was, of course, he was little. He was going under the rope and I'm yelling, Michael, get back here. You can't do that. And he said, if that man in the floppy hat down there can be down there, so can I. And nobody could see this man that he was talking about. So later on that evening, we went to the Ghost of Gettysburg offices and we were going on a ghost tour. And he points at the wall and it was an apparition. And he's like, there's the man with the floppy hat, Mom. And here it was, I believe he was a Texas regiment and they were known for floppy hats. And that was a soldier. And it was right from around the exact location that we saw him looking down into Devil's Den.
Yeah.
So he actually had more experiences than I did that time. And so, yeah, it was through his experiences because he was a very young child at the time. And, he just looked at it like they were real people. Well, and they were real people at one time, but like he didn't even realize that they were spirits. He thought he was following a person.
Yeah. So help me understand this, Holly. To me, going there with your senses and, enlightened senses and everything like that, to me, it's like going into a crowd of people and all of them have a different question, right? So I have like maybe 100 people in front of me and they're all talking at the same time and they're all asking a different question. Is that sometimes the way you feel like when you go there? Is there just time where you're just overwhelmed? Like,
not really. I haven't I've never had that feeling. It seems like a lot of the stuff that I experience on the battlefield is a lot different. Now, this last time we were there, we went for the Warren's convention that they had down there. And we were out in Devil's Den going over. I was showing someone where the triangular field was. And actually, as I was going over, walking down into the triangular field, something literally took me off my feet. Really? And, I still have a muscle tweaked from that. And I just realized, and you could hear on the recording me saying, oh, wait, no, I'm not meant to go down there. And what's odd is that I always have, like, when I drive right through that area, like they always say your equipment and stuff goes awry. And I even lose my GPS in my car.
Wow.
When we're driving through that area. For that brief second that we're driving up that hill by the triangular field, I have no GPS. And then once we get away from it, the GPS comes back. So, but I never get the overwhelming sensation that there's a lot of chattering going on.
Okay.
Now at the Peach Orchard, we did lose time and space. We were there after dusk. It was dark and it was in the winter. It was during COVID. So there was nobody out and about.
Yeah, sure.
And we were with our kids. It was a friend of mine and her kids and my daughter. And they kept seeing what looked like someone crouched on the ground. So they kept running towards him. And when they would get there was nobody there. And this kept happening. The Peach Orchard, if you've ever been to Gettysburg, is not very big.
Yeah.
But we somehow could not figure out where we were. We ended up going all the way out to the opposite side and ended up coming out on the main road. And my car was back in the national park. So we had to walk around and we completely lost time and space when we were in there. We had no idea how long we'd been in there. We had no idea where we were when we came out. And it was the weirdest experience I've ever had.
Wow. Yeah, that really is a strange experience, losing time. That's scary enough. Where you can't, look at your watch and like, wait a minute, it's an hour? I've been here like 5 minutes.
That's how we went in there, and all of a sudden it was time for the battlefield to close. Oh, wow. And we were we didn't know where my car was. So we were just walking the road hoping that we'd find it. And then eventually I opened up Waze on my phone. And it showed me where my car was parked and led us back to my car, which was completely on the other side of the Peach Orchard.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, really, really quickly, my mom loved Gettysburg. She loved going there. And I can't remember where she was, but I remember my mom telling me this eerie story because my mom liked the paranormal too. She said she was in a part of Gettysburg, a part of the battlefield, and she said she went into it and there were no birds chirping, there was no wind, there was nothing. Like it was dead. And my mom stood there for like, she said maybe a minute or two, and it was like, yeah, I gotta leave. Whatever this area is, they do not want me there. And she was like, okay, I'm leaving. She said it really loud. She goes, I don't care if people think I'm crazy. She said, okay, I'm leaving. I'm sorry that I invaded your space. I'm going now. And my mom laughed. And she was like, my mom was there like 3 or 4 times. And she's like, when she would come back, she'd just go right past that area. And she said, nope, I'm not going in there again.
Yeah, I think I had an experience like that out in the wheat field. But I've only investigated that area once. And another time where I've had that eerie experience like that was at Sachs Bridge. But other than that, I haven't had any well, I shouldn't say that, because when we investigated the orphanage, but it wasn't even, I wasn't picking up on anything in the orphanage. It was actually prior to, like a week or two prior to us investigating the orphanage, there was a public group in there, and the guy was antagonizing the spirit of the woman who ran the orphanage, and she literally banged his head off the wall till it was bleeding.
Whoa.
And I was sitting there and I thought to myself while we were listening to a lecture,
Yeah.
ladies, we need to get out of here. And my one friend leaned forward and she said, did you just say we need to get out of here? I said, not out loud. And they were getting up to leave. And just as they did, I felt my head getting banged off the wall. I was experiencing the energy of what had happened. And we didn't even know about it till we went upstairs. And the person there saying, did they tell you what happened here like a week or two ago? And we're like, no. And they're like, literally where you were sitting, someone's head was banged off the wall. And I said, well, gee, thanks for the warning.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, of course, if there's going to be energy like that, I'm going to be the one to find it.
Yeah, thanks, right? Thanks for nothing. So let me go through some of your methods here. Do you ever I know this is a really popular method now, the Estes method. Have you done that at all?
I actually did that for my first time, the last time I was in Gettysburg.
Okay, how did it go?
My daughter introduced me to it, believe it or not, because she watches a lot of the YouTuber ghost hunters.
Yeah.
And that's where she found out about it. And I thought it was very interesting because I'm not into all of these, funky, I don't get into tech. But all of a sudden, I've been finding myself wanting more and more tech. I ended up buying a crystal pod from one of the girls that makes them. And then she makes another one called the Seer Pod, which is, works more with static electricity. And now I want to buy another thing she made. And then I got myself the spirit box. Yeah. And so I find myself very intrigued because when I had the spirit box in Gettysburg and we were doing, it was insane. The chatter that we got in Devil's Den.
Wow.
It was nonstop chatter.
Was it like, do you feel it was just soldiers?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was soldiers. And yeah, I think some of it was energy because there's a lot of energy there too. Like there's a lot of people that come through there and you don't know what they're carrying with them when they come through.
Absolutely. You don't know. And remember, energy just doesn't go away. Energy is put into maybe a rock, maybe a tree.
And Gettysburg is good for that because there is so much quartz there.
Yeah.
And that seems to hold it.
Yeah, absolutely. And things like water, things like limestone. A lot of paranormal investigators said, they'll be investigating an area that has water near it, like a freshwater stream, limestone caves, and it's like, turn it to 11.
I investigated a private home not far from where I live. Not only their house was directly across from the entrance to the ambulance entrance to the emergency room of the hospital. They also had a running spring that ran under their house. And I remember going in, and their basement was a speakeasy.
Oh, man.
And she didn't know that she was told that the guy who originally owned the house had a koi pond, and that's where he would keep his koi fish. And I said, that is a copper tank. That was a still.
Yeah.
No, it was for his fish in the wintertime. I'm like, okay. And I said, why are there peepholes on the doors?
Yeah.
But, we just let her believe what she wanted to believe.
Sure.
But then I remember there was a hole in the wall, in the foundation. And she looked and she said, oh, that's where these shadow things come in. That's what the last investigators told us. There were, bad, evil things.
Yeah.
And I looked at the member of my team when she left, and we were what they called the basement and attic specialists. We like to go in the basements and the attics.
Okay.
And she looked at me and she said, you want to stick your finger in that hole, don't you? And I said, how did you know?
Oh,
And
boy.
And I did. And literally, it was a running spring that was going through and under the house. And you could literally feel the water running. And like the area that we live in was very prominent with the Susquehannock Indians and with the tribe. And so we have a lot down by the river where, almost every house, because it was all burial mounds at one time.
Yeah.
And when those homes were built, they didn't do anything to, get rid of the things that were buried there. They didn't know better. They didn't know any better. They just built. And so there's a lot of activity down along that river.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. And that's something my wife is like haunted houses. She's like, nope, we're never going to buy a haunted house. And I've always wanted to live in that would never happen. But I talk to people who have owned or lived in haunted houses, grew up in them, who may be in a haunted house right now. But let me ask you this. Do you prefer a place like Gettysburg where it's wide open, you can just, go and do what you need to do, or a house or a jail where it's more confined? Which you prefer to investigate, Holly?
I like to do ones that are, because Gettysburg is so huge that it takes, to really thoroughly investigate, you would have to spend a lot of time there. There are, smaller locations like the Bel Air House, Malvern Manor, and, the Hinsdale House, places like that, I truly enjoy, because you can get a lot of information in one night. And every time you go back, you can experience a different type of information.
Sure.
Like right now, my latest obsession is Wildwood Sanitarium out in New York.
Okay.
It's in Salamanca. And I actually want to go back there, because when we went, we really didn't get a lot of investigative time in there. But I don't know why these places that did the aquatherapy, the hydrotherapy, whenever I walk into them, I can smell chlorine. And I remember walking into Wildwood, for example, and my friend said, I'm looking at my friend and I'm standing in a room and I'm like, I smell water. I smell chlorine.
Yeah.
And she just starts laughing. And I'm like, okay, I know you're not going to tell me, because they never do. I asked them not to tell me any history that they know.
Sure.
And we go down in the basement and there's the hydrotherapy baths. And she said, now do you understand why you were smelling chlorine? And I'm like, okay.
Right.
Yeah, now I understand, because I did the same thing in St. Albans when we got into the area where they would do the hydrotherapy. I literally started smelling chlorine. And, it seems like it never fails. Those types of places that did that kind of work, I'm always like, I smell chlorine, and everybody be like, oh, okay, they must have did hydrotherapy here. Like, when places that did ECT in the early days, and I can smell something burning. Yeah. So, I've learned different things, or sense different triggers.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me. The other thing that always really spikes my attention is jail. Because in jails, you're dealing with a lot of emotion. There might be people there who are innocent, right? There might be people there who they're not going to make it. They're just not. They're not built for jail. And then there are people who are built for jail and they're hard as nails. And those people, are going to, basically die there because they're, for whatever reason, whatever they did. So how do you navigate those different range? Because have you ever been like, see, I look at it like, and I've heard this a million times, you might go into a cell, or let me ask you this. Have you just gone into a cell and went, okay, this is heavy. This is a lot. You know what I mean? Have you ever done that?
I had that experience in Jim Thorpe, at the prison in Jim Thorpe. We were down in solitary confinement in the basement, and
Oof.
I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of that prison, but
Yes, I have.
those solitary confinement cells were so small and they had pure metal doors on them. You couldn't see out of them. And I just had such a feeling of dread, and just like deep in my chest, it hurt, like trying to breathe.
Yeah.
And that, now I never experienced that because, believe it or not, most of the time when we did West Virginia Penn, I stayed away from the cell blocks. I would go outside the cell blocks, and the only other time I felt that heaviness was in the Sugar Shack at West Virginia Penitentiary. And I don't go down there either. I don't like to go into the Sugar Shack at West Virginia. That place just, really scares me.
Yeah. On the other hand, since you're a woman and being in a jail, and I want to say this the right way, I'm not to offend anyone, but like, you're a woman, you're in a jail, right? Someone's gonna try to grab you, maybe in places you don't want to be grabbed. Has that ever been a place where you walked in, maybe not a jail, and something grabbed you and you went, stop, kind of that attitude?
I have never, I've been what you would call jumped. I've been knocked on my butt by an entity, but I've never been, to something that was uncomfortable for me. I've never had that. I mean, I've seen other people have that experience. When we were at Malvern, we did a seance up in the attic. And I remember one of the girls kept saying, "Stop touching me." And then I had a skeptic. He was a cop that was like a 6 foot something, 200 and some pound guy who did not believe in this, get physically lifted up and pulled out of the circle. And I didn't realize it because he was right next to me and I had my hand on his and I could feel him moving. And I just thought, he's uncomfortable. And then I remember everybody that was watching it on video said, no, he physically got, and I remember him jumping up and he started cursing. He was like, what the heck? And I was like, it was, and to hear everybody say, no, he physically got moved. And he was so freaked out by it that he was still messaging me when we were on our way back to Pennsylvania from Iowa, because we drove out there, and he was, I can't remember where he was from, but he was literally messaging me and asking me, like, what do I do? I'm so freaked out. How do I protect myself from this? And, and he was a skeptic going into it. So for me, that was just like, that was like, wow, he was a big guy. You can't just say, well, you moved him. No, I couldn't lift someone that big at that time.
Yeah. And that's interesting. So you read my mind, Holly. Let's talk about skeptics. What do you do, whether it be a private residence or maybe a public residence that you're investigating, and you have somebody with you that goes, come on, there's no such thing. You guys are wasting your time.
Experienced that for years with my husband. My husband is big into the ufology. Okay. However, he did not want to believe in spirits and ghosts and stuff like that. So I spent a lot of time with him, dealing with that. And believe it or not, I go into investigations with what I call healthy skepticism. I go in there believing that it's everything but a haunting until it's anything but. It can't be anything but the haunting. I want to disprove everything else before I will literally say, oh yeah, it's a spirit. And that was just how I was trained, to go in there with that heavy dose, heavy level of skepticism, that you want to disprove everything before you will tell a family, well, you're being haunted. And so for me, I go into every investigation as a skeptic. I'm one of the people that get yelled at online when people post pictures and I'll be like, I don't see what you're seeing. So it's probably pareidolia, because you did tell everybody what you saw. So now everybody else is seeing it.
Right. And
so, I am that type of skeptic. I am going to say it's this, and this until I can prove it's not. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's the healthiest way to go into it, because if you're going to go into every investigation saying it's a spirit, right away, and you can miss something dangerous like carbon monoxide poisoning, like high levels of radiation in the home.
Right.
So that's, I embrace skeptics because I like to prove them wrong.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
actually worked with someone for quite a few years that was a skeptic. And
Uh-huh.
every time we proved him wrong, I would sit there and laugh. So I'd be like, yeah, you didn't believe us.
Yeah, that's great. But that's a great attitude. And all my guests have the same attitude, which I absolutely love. Because your job is not to go in to be like some charlatan or con man and go like, "Yep, all this is yep, you're right. Okay, give me $500 or give me whatever amount of money and I got to come back, so you got to give me another $500 or whatever." Come on. I mean, it just makes it bad for all of us, right? Or actually trying to help people.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and that I don't know. It just
I
bugs
get
me.
very upset when, I see people constantly wanting to say without going through all of the steps. Like, I'm very much rooted in science. So for me, I do want to go through kind of like almost a scientific method and do questioning to rule out things like mental health issues, to rule out things
Yes.
like physical health issues,
Yes.
anything that can be causing this experience. You're not doing justice to the clients if you're not
Right.
trying to uncover everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. But have you ever had a case, Holly, that you walked in and the person is like, "It's a demon. I'm telling you that they're making my life hell and everything." And you kind of go in there and you're not finding anything and you're not discovering anything. Like, how do you tell that client or that person, like, "Hey, there's nothing in here"?
I've
Uh,
never had to do that. I
okay.
usually would leave that up to other teams that I've worked with. We've had psychologists on the
Okay.
team, and that was kind of like their job. This is like my first time I'm actually between working with Phantom Detectives as a researcher and then, having my own team. This is the
Yeah.
first time I'm involved with a team that doesn't have a psychologist on board. So I'm sure at some point at least with my team itself, that I'm going to have those conversations.
Yeah.
And it kind of scares me because, when you're trying to talk to someone about the possibility of it being something like a mental illness,
Yeah.
you don't know what the outcome is going to be. Because, do I believe there are a lot of people that are in mental asylums that could possibly have a possession oppression thing? Of course I do. Or that they could be psychic. Yes, 100%. And I think, for the longest time, they didn't know what to do with people that had abilities. So that's what they did, is they put them in institutions. And I believe a lot of people at institutions passed away and they had psychic abilities and they just
Yeah.
didn't understand it back then.
Right. Exactly. Now, on the flip side, have you ever had an investigation where there's something in the house and it's causing problems, but there's nothing you can do about it? It is what it is.
Unfortunately, yes. A lot of times, especially when it's something, tied to the land. It's something that, like we see it a lot. I'm half Lakota. So I work a lot with land spirits and things like that. And, for me, I see that a lot, especially
Mm,
when you get to places like, you look at West Virginia Penitentiary. What's right across from West Virginia Penitentiary but a gigantic mound
mm,
that belonged to a
right.
tribe from, way, way back. And,
Sure.
they claim that they removed everything,
Mm,
but did they really? We don't know.
yeah. Right.
And still, that was a holy ground for the indigenous people of the time. So for them, you don't know what type of things is still tied to that land and land spirits. We have,
Yeah.
depending upon what belief system you're looking at, you go into paganism, into the Celtic faith and the Norse faith. They very much believe in like dryads, which are tree spirits,
Yeah.
and you look at the animistic religions that believe everything has a soul. You have energy everywhere.
Yeah.
And so there are times where you can't remove that energy no matter what
No.
you try to do. And the people just have to learn how to live with it. And
Yeah.
that's, I think as investigators, that's why I talk a lot about investigators working with their clients at the spiritual level their clients are in, not their own. I'm an interfaith minister, so I work with people of all faiths, from pagan to Jewish to Muslim. I have experience with all faith bases because I believe we all hold a piece of the puzzle, I tell people we're like a gemstone. Every religion has a facet, and we become a beautiful diamond at the end when we're all together. So I try to work with all of my clients where their spiritual level is. It's like you can't bring a rabbi into a Catholic home and expect a positive outcome for those Catholic clients. And I do preach that a lot to paranormal teams. I actually do a speech on that. You know, I have written up a couple articles for Phantom Detectives about spirituality and the importance of working with your clients on their level.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So, two quick questions here. One, I am not convinced of orbs.
Good, me either.
Oh, I thought you were going to fight me on it.
No, I am not. Actually, my former team. Now, my former team that I was with, oh my God, for probably almost a decade and a half, I was with them. And we actually did research on orbs, and we threw flour in the air and took pictures of it. We threw dust in the air. We threw paprika. You know, we did film cameras compared to digital cameras. We did everything. And I look at and that's one of my big pet peeves and why I get kicked out of a lot of the paranormal groups on Facebook, because when people post orbs, I'll be like, it's a bug.
Yes.
It's a bug. It's dust. You know, where were you? It's raining. It's a you know, and so like, I'm always the one, and they'll be like, you can't say that to people. And I'm like, but it's the truth. And I know I offend a lot of people, but I do not buy into that, because that's how I was trained. It's not proof of paranormal activity. However, you can use it for a starting point if you believe that, you know, you saw these things to the naked eye.
Right.
Not so much on camera, but if you're seeing these lights to the naked eye, these orbs to the naked eye, it's completely different than on a film.
Yeah.
And so I was taught that, you know, that school of thought that we, you know, don't use that to say, oh yeah, there's definitely a haunting here.
Yeah. And, you know, I've got, like, we're both on the same page with that, Holly. I've gotten into like Facebook and other places.
Yeah, I'm always in trouble.
Everybody's losing their mind with me.
Yeah.
But
I've learned to keep my mouth shut now, because, you know, the first thing I say is, you know, no, that's dust. And then the other thing I say is it's pareidolia. Don't tell me what you're seeing, because then I'm going to see it too.
Yeah. But here's the thing where I back off at, and I think we're probably on the same page because we talked about this earlier. You know, some people say, I know that's my grandma checking on the kids. That orb is my grandma checking on the kids because it's going right down the hallway. You know, and I'm like, okay, if that's, maybe that is a sign that you want to believe that.
And I
don't think there's no harm in that. Yeah,
I'm like, if you feel that more than anything, then I will agree with you. But I'm still going to say I think it's dust. But if that's what you want to believe, then that's your belief. And it's not my place to tell you your belief is wrong.
Absolutely. Now, the other thing I thought was really interesting that I had some paranormal experiences with, you hear this from time to time. So my teenage daughter, when she was in high school, she had a lot of trouble. She just didn't fit in. She, you know, the same old. She was made fun of. She was bullied. And I'm her dad. I'm like a big grizzly bear. I'm like, leave my daughter alone. But when my daughter was going through this, Holly, 3 things happened that were really interesting. One time I was sitting downstairs in my little man cave just watching TV. And right next to my ear, a woman's voice said, John. Like right next to my ear. There's nobody there. Okay. All right. That's interesting. And you know, I know the paranormal a lot, I was like, oh, that's interesting. The second thing I had, Holly, was I always felt when I was alone in the house, somebody's watching me. There's something in there. And especially when I get near my daughter's bedroom, I felt something like something's off. Okay. The third experience I had was I was downstairs in my man cave again, sitting on my futon, you know, just taking a nap. And you know how you would come up to your husband, or maybe your husband do this to you or your kids, and they'll kind of like pet your back, you know what I mean? Stroke your back a little bit to wake you up, to tell you something. You're like, hey, wake me up at 5. And I felt like these sharp nails, like like scratching my back. And my wife doesn't have sharp nails. She hates nails, okay? And there was a part of me, Holly, that said, don't turn around. Don't move, okay? And flash forward, we got my daughter therapy. We got her help. I went in and screamed at the principal, leave my daughter alone, and there's going to be hell to pay, right? And about a couple months, 3 months after that, my daughter was good again. She felt positive, and there was no more what I would say darkness in the house. There was no more voices next to me. There was no more something touching me. So I know that's kind of a long-winded way to ask you, do you feel, especially with younger people or just people in general, that if they're going through some negative things, dark things, that an entity can attach themselves? And how would you deal with that?
I don't think so much an entity as it
Okay.
is, if you look at the traditional like poltergeist type thing, that, they talk about a lot of times that happens with teens and preteens.
Right, exactly.
And that's energy. And that energy
Interesting.
can portray itself like when you were talking about like the nails going down your back. To me, that sounds similar to like a hag attack. And that's energetic thing. That's a lot of times like sleep paralysis. It's all energy. And so for me, I don't know so much about it being more like a dark or evil entity as it is that energy, that negative energy that's exuding from these kids, because that age, those teen years, for some reason harbors a lot of negativity, and that negativity has to come out somehow.
Right.
And you like when you go to say like after she started getting therapy and she started becoming more positive and feeling a lot better, it stopped. To me, that comes back to energy. It makes me think that it was the energy that was coming from her and not so much, because I remember doing a case where it was a bunch of teenage kids and they kept swearing up and down it was an evil entity. And here they were taking chlorocidin, which is like a medication that induces like a kind of like acid, but it was more like a medication that kind of induced a high. And I'm like, well, of course you're feeling negative crap. You're getting yourself stoned and you're playing with a Ouija board. What do you expect? There's nothing bad here except for the drugs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just thought that was really interesting because that's been to some cases, like exorcism cases, you might have heard about Edinburgh
Yes.
poltergeist, famous case.
Yeah, actually, Ed and Lorraine Warren had actually went in on that one. And we actually, with my former team, it was one of the cases we would study. The Edinburgh poltergeist.
Yes.
And that was one of the cases that we would study. And, and if you look at the correlation, they're always teens or preteens.
Correct.
That are, going through a bad experience. And, I get angry when people say, well, that was all fake. But how do we know that? They came out and said, oh, yeah, I faked it. But how do we know that wasn't pressure from the family or whomever to just say, we don't want all this press, so just say you faked it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about that. In your bio, you're I would say mentoring, if that's all right, young kids and stuff. Here's my thing. How do you convince them? Because they see a guy like Zach Baggins and some other people, they're like, I'm going to be rich. I'm going to get all this money. I'm going to, how do you be like, whoa, 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 whoa?
Yeah, my former boss, my former team was one of those types.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and they were actually involved in they were a paraceleb, and I teach them from what my former boss went through the trails of addiction and lying and cheating and stealing and getting arrested, and I show them it's not all this. It's not making tons of money and becoming famous. There is a dark side to making money and becoming famous. Yeah. And, I tell them this, I never got into this to make money. My goal was to answer my own questions and to help people. And if I make some money off of my books, which I don't even care, I don't care if my books sell at all. My books, if they find the people they're meant to find, that's all that matters to me. That's why I write them.
Yeah.
And for me, I really, because I tell them, it's less than 1% of people in the paranormal actually become famous.
Yeah.
And with fame, there comes a whole different set. Like I watched
Right.
my former director be on top of the world and then everything go crashing down. And, now starting to rebuild again. And,
Yeah.
it's hard. And,
Yeah.
especially when you care about people. And I tell them that. I said, there's a whole world. There's a whole dark side to celebrity that and that's actually the book that I'm currently writing.
Oh, nice.
Is about, the racism and sexism and all the little isms that are happening in the community that everybody knows is happening, but no one wants to talk about. Because I dealt with it, being half indigenous and being biracial, I dealt with racism, and that's why I left my former team. Because, they were calling me and one of my friends, they were using a slur against indigenous people, and we asked them not to, and no one would stand up for us. So I left a team that I had been with for 15 years because I didn't want to stand up to that anymore. And I see people like classism. It's become, but no one wants to talk about the negative aspects of the field. So that's why I started writing, and I'm gathering stories from people about, my daughter's boyfriend is a person of color. And we went to a con and the Ghost Brothers were there. And they were so excited to see another person of color at a con that every time they see him, they were like, "Hey, yo," So, and he came home and he said, "Yeah, there were like 5 people of color there," and he said 3 of them were the Ghost Brothers. But seeing someone like him, it really opened him up to okay, so that the paranormal isn't just for Caucasian people,
Right. Right. It's for anyone who has a love of the paranormal. So if you have the love of paranormal, great. If you want to help people, great. But just remember, I talked to paranormal investigators, Holly, and they said, yeah, we'll go on an investigation and nothing happened. Or then maybe we get one little EVP, or we get one little picture, nothing. And then they'll go on another one and it'll be like, wow, this is crazy. This is, we got a lot of stuff. And again, you have to separate the art almost from the artist, right? You see these shows, like Ghost Hunters and all these drama. Their job is to horror movies.
Entertain. They're para-entertainment.
Yeah, entertainment.
And that's why they're listed as para-entertainment, because they're entertainment. It's like professional wrestling.
Yeah.
It's sports entertainment. And that's what I tell these kids. Don't always trust what you're seeing on TV. Because it is para-entertainment. It's a different realm than paranormal investigating. Because they can splice things together. They can do things that, you're not going to see. I've been in locations for 3 days and didn't get a peep. And then at another location, a week or 2 later, I've gotten Class A EVPs where things are literally answering me. We're having a conversation in the saved room. And these things are talking with us, thinking that we're talking to them. So I said, you're not like, I have kids all the time saying, well, I want the excitement. I'm like, honestly, it can be extremely boring.
Yeah.
Now I have sat in locations for 3 days and have been bored out of my mind, and then have listened to hours and hours of, sound through my recordings and got nothing. So I said, you could go through 6 days of nothing.
Exactly.
And you have to be prepared for that. You're not going to have things thrown at you. You're not, well, I said, it can happen.
Yeah.
But it's a rare occurrence. Like I try to explain to kids, like demonic things are some of the rarest hauntings out there. And I said, in my area in particular, for a long time, we had teams that were calling themselves quote unquote dark teams. Oh, we'll only take demonic cases. And I'm like, but who, under whose authority? Like, the team that I formerly worked with, we actually worked with the church.
Yeah.
And we did rule out cases for the church, and and that's a whole other, ball of worms. The detail, the attention to detail on those types of cases that you have to have. It's like working for the FBI.
Wow.
I mean, it's intense.
I love that. Yeah, and that's the way it should be, right? It shouldn't be you just, "Here I am."
Well, yeah,
And
because
everybody's like, "What are you doing?"
the church wants everything. When you're working a case to rule out for exorcism, they want
Yeah,
psychological reports, medical reports,
love it. Sure,
investigative
right.
reports where you can prove this stuff is happening before they'll even have a priest go in there.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that. And the other thing I'm sure you tell the kids or whoever you're working with is be careful what you let in, right? Like this,
Yes.
you could open a door that you shouldn't have opened,
Yeah, that's
and
been a
now what?
huge thing. Like, I
Yeah.
collect Ouija boards, and all of my
Oh
kids
boy.
know this. Yeah, I have
Yikes.
weird hobbies and weird interests, and Ouija boards are my thing. Pendulum boards are another thing. A lot of divination stuff. And
Ooh, Holly.
yeah, I know.
Boy,
And my
boy.
kids, but my kids know that they're a tool, that they're not something you play with. And I remember when my middle daughter was in high school, that whole Charlie thing was going on where they put the pencils on.
Oh,
And
yeah.
she was at a friend's house and they did that. And she came home and I started freaking out on her. And I'm like, being native, I get my smudge shell down and I start smudging her. And then I get the holy water for an added benefit. She's
Yeah.
like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Do you understand what you were doing is no different than playing with a Ouija board, playing with a divination board, being out there trying to conjure up an entity to come into you." I said, invoking a spirit, you're doing, you think it's a
Yeah.
game, but you're
It's not.
actually giving someone approval to come
Yeah,
through.
yeah,
And I said,
yeah.
it's not a game. And so then I gave a huge lecture to all of their friends about Charlie and how inappropriate that game was. And that if I found any of them playing this game, that they were going to have to come to my house and get a holy water bath.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm
Which,
like, it's scary because these kids think
yeah.
they see these things and they think, oh, let's try it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
And and a lot of these things do get a bad rap by media. And,
Yes.
and that's why, like I always say with the Ouija board, I'm like, yeah, I see people always say, oh, well, are they good or are they bad? And I said, they're no different than getting a voice recording.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how you use it and how you're trained to make sure you're setting appropriate space and to make sure you're protecting yourself and to make sure you're not playing with it, that you're actually skilled. Because, I have a Ouija board that was my grandfather's. Him and my grandmother came over from Ireland and they brought wood from their homestead with them. My grandmother had hers made into a Last Supper picture and he had his made into a Ouija board.
Okay, interesting. I love
Yeah,
it.
and I have both pieces. I have the Last Supper hanging in my kitchen, and I have the Ouija board up in my office.
Wow.
So
That
yeah, it's the gamut in my house, and
wow.
yeah, we welcome all belief paths. So
Yeah.
for me, I learn all belief paths because I think it's important to know them all.
Yes. I couldn't agree more because that's the way we learn about each other and we can work with one another and make this a better world. It's
Yep.
that simple. Like,
Yep,
who
and
wants to live in a
that's how
crappy
I've
world?
been. And I tell that to my kids all the time. I said, we accept everybody where they're at, not where we think they should be at. And,
Yes.
and it's in the paranormal, it's you have to work with people where they're at. And a lot of times, like as a psychic and a medium, I feel it's my duty to tell the stories of the people who passed and that are in these locations and want their story told.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. Holly, I could go on for hours with you. This has been amazing. And, definitely would love to have you back on the show. I didn't even get to some questions I was going to ask you. But why don't you tell my spooky friends how they can reach out to you, how they can learn from you, and anything you got kind of coming up that you like to share?
Well, right now I'm kind of off for the winter. I'm writing.
Good for you.
Yep. I'm writing. I have 3 books going at once. So I'm
Wow.
hoping to have them
Okay.
out by spring. I'm doing a book on magical and medicinal uses of herbs. And then I'm also, like I said, I'm writing a book on all the isms in the paranormal community, the things that everybody knows is happening, but they're afraid to talk about.
Yeah.
And then I'm also writing a book about kids with special needs that have psychic gifts and how you as a parent can help them. And it's through my children's story, my kids are now 25 and 24. No, sorry, 25 and 22. And so, it's the things that we did to help our kids. And so, those can be found. I have a website. It's just hollyfaust.com. It's very easy. And I also have a Facebook page. It's Holly Faust, author and psychic medium. And I have a TikTok. I don't get on TikTok as much, but I used to, and I'm planning on starting again. I'm planning on start doing live sessions where I do readings and stuff on there. And that's Native Crafty Witch on TikTok. And, Native Crafty Witch.
I love it.
Yeah, it's so funny. When I it used to be an income source for me for a long time. I actually funded an entire trip to Salem just from working on TikTok.
Oh, nice.
And I want to get back to that. My grandson was born, it'll be 2 years ago. And when he was born, I kind of got away from it because I got busy with him. But now I'm getting back in the groove. I went through a little period of depression where, I had left a lot of things behind, and now I'm getting back on my toes. And on my psychic medium page, I do offer readings. I make vigil candles that I offer up on there, and energy body cleanses, which is doing a lot of distance Reiki.
I love it. So my spooky friends, go check it out, hollyfaust.com. Please support her. Obviously, from this interview, you've realized she's a wonderful person and a knowledgeable and loving person. So please, reach out to her. I'm sure if they have questions for you about the paranormal or just about their life, how they can do certain readings, I'm sure you would love to hear from them.
Oh, definitely.
Great. Well, thank you so much again. This has been a wonderful time. I loved it. Some great stories and stuff. Something I can learn from too, just finding out how everyone does the world differently and views it differently. That's what makes it a fun time. So again, thank you so much, Holly. I really appreciate it. Stay spooky. Bye. Have a good one, Holly.
You too.
Bye-bye.